You might have heard the story about a family who was deciding whether to send their son back to school. The parents had hired a tutor who was homeschooling the child, and the tutor believed that the boy was ready to go back. But his parents disagreed. They felt that distance learning needed to continue. The tutor said, "It's time." But the parents challenged and said, "Our son's healthy look hasn't returned to his face, but you, his tutor, think he's ready to go back to school?" With all due respect, we are his parents. We believe he needs a few more months at home to rest and learn. We'll allow him to sleep late, he can follow his own schedule, and perhaps this will relieve some of the pressure for both him and for us. After 3 months, then we'll be ready to send him back. Now, whether or not this is something you would have done, we all understand the laws exist requiring children to attend school. And today, parents in our community are being offered the choice to send children to school in person or not. In reality, this story is not from the year when COVID-19 took over our lives. It's a midrash that dates back thousands of years. Does this change the meaning for you? This story, this fable, can also be viewed as an allegory to the Israelites wandering in the desert. God saw them and observed, "My children's look of good health has not yet returned to their faces. They are still recovering from their experience as slaves. Should I still give them the Torah? Why not let them enjoy the experience of the wilderness, knowing that I am with them? Allow them time to adjust to being free, and then, after 2 or 3 months, then I will give them the Torah and all its teachings." Balancing our safety, health, and other needs is nothing new. These stories and teachings are centuries old, and yet the parallels are so close to our experience today. What's the safe thing to do? What should we avoid doing? Can we return to our regular activities? Will we ever return to normalcy? The questions we have asked are endless, yet they persist, and our answers remain elusive. So, how did our ancestors make decisions with even less information than today? They shared a lot of prayers. They came together in community. With their faith and their hope, they were united, and we must do the same. We choose life, as Torah teaches. We seek a life of blessing, and we strive to be optimistic. Yet, as we know, it's often easier said than done. I've witnessed the struggles firsthand, and I've read many of your accounts on social media. This is a very challenging time, yet we must choose to believe that things will get better. Our tradition teaches that all is foreseen, yet free will is given. How does that work? If everything is predetermined, then what about free will? Do our choices even matter? Making choices and being chosen, these concepts are challenging for us as modern Jews. For the founders of our Reform movement, chosenness was a huge obstacle. Did this mean that we were chosen over others, somehow elevated in stature? Simply because of our religion, are we automatically better or more empowered? Many of us have fundamental problems with this idea. I know I do. So let's examine this more closely. Being a part of the Jewish community means we must be willing to accept the gifts of our tradition. It's not about being forced to do things. It's about taking a firm hold on our values and beliefs. More than being elevated, we choose to accept certain responsibilities that connect us to God. We include ourselves as new links in a long chain of those who came before us. As we are taught, God's presence is available to us wherever we choose to let God in. On Yom Kippur, we choose again to be part of a holy people, Mamlechet HaKohanim, a kingdom of priests. All of us can choose to find the divine presence wherever we look. But that simply doesn't happen by sitting in a corner isolated. We must choose to opt in. Another midrash or story is offered about when the Israelites accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai. God had approached all the other nations first with the obligations of Torah, but when these nations heard about the prohibitions against murder, adultery, theft, they said, "No thanks." It was ultimately the Israelites who opted in by saying, "Yes, all that we have heard from God, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and understand." In this morning's Torah reading from the portion Nitzavim, we read that all the Israelites stood in community, ready and willing to accept the commandments. Even those who weren't standing there, it is said, also accepted the gift of Torah. By choosing and being chosen, the Israelites conveyed their sense of ownership, expectation, and hope. Today, we strive to accept the gift of Torah, too. Last year, Sarah Hurwitz eloquently wrote in her book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, that she chose Judaism, even though she was born into a Jewish family. After she became a bat mitzvah, she struggled to find a more mature understanding of her religion. Following a series of events in her 20s and 30s, she began seeking spirituality. She wrote that she was, in effect, looking for a hobby. She could have stumbled upon a pottery class or a photography session, but instead, she was led to the basic Judaism class taught at her local temple. Her spiritual return to Judaism is detailed throughout the book, and as a former speechwriter for Michelle Obama, her writing style is uplifting and emotional. Hurwitz describes the phrase Jews by choice. Traditionally understood as those who choose to convert to Judaism, Hurwitz notes that all Jews in North America are Jews by choice, and far too many are choosing to opt out. At a turning point in her life, Hurwitz opted in and chose her path back to Judaism. As her journey to return home began, she discovered that Judaism was relevant, endlessly fascinating, and alive. Over Zoom this past spring, I reviewed Hurwitz's book with our Shachtel Library Readers Group. As over 30 faces in small boxes surrounded my computer screen, we all connected and discussed the book in profound and meaningful ways. The impact of that moment was clear. We were safely in our homes and studies, choosing to opt in and experience a deeper connection to our faith. With all the challenges of the pandemic, stay-at-home orders, mass confusion, there we were. Afterwards, I reflected more on the time we had shared. At a time when community was becoming increasingly challenging and uncertain, we reimagined and rediscovered what it meant to be together. Judaism is all about looking into our tradition, finding options and paths to consider, and authentically applying them to our own lives. As the medieval scholar Maimonides taught in the 12th century, listen to the truth from whoever said it. Our truths come in many forms and are found in many places. We are taught that there are at least 70 different interpretations to anything found in Torah, but we must be ready to discover, receive, and ask many questions. But some of us feel we aren't prepared to ask these questions. We may lack the time or knowledge to fully opt in. We say we can't get involved with yet another extracurricular activity, like taking a basic Judaism class or participating in a service or program. What if Sarah Hurwitz had said that? Should these be the obstacles we create for ourselves this year? When we feel an emotional connection to engage and learn more about our faith, isn't that God offering us the choice to opt in? If we can find our own door, and Judaism is filled with many doors, then we can choose to opt in and see how relevant, endlessly fascinating, and alive Judaism can be for us too. Now, certainly, many other things can also fill our days with relevance. But living a Jewish life means taking the things we do and infusing them with even greater meaning and spiritual connection. We can instill every moment of our day with interpretations and values from our sacred heritage. If we choose to opt in, how much more meaningful might our lives be? This past spring, we were forced to quickly adapt to a new reality. While we aren't strangers to technology at Congregation Beth Israel, we needed to rethink how to offer the same level of robust programming, learning, and worship as news of the pandemic was unfolding. Like many of you, I was a little scared, not only because I worried about getting sick, but I was completely unfamiliar with this thing called Zoom. But after practicing and giving myself permission to explore, I caught on. And so did each of you. Zoom has connected us to our work, our families, our friends, and our Jewish tradition. We have come together meaningfully online so many times, and we're doing so right now. A few weeks ago, a new school year began. For most of our families, online learning has fully taken root for our teachers and our students. Over the last several months, we heard that resuming school in person was a terrible idea. But on the other hand, we heard that not preparing to return to school was just as terrible. Children would fall behind. There wouldn't be enough socialization like in-person learning could offer. Wherever we looked, our medical community had multiple opinions, which prompted many of us to respond, 2 doctors, 3 opinions. And all of a sudden, many of us with no medical background were being asked to complete surveys. Should we opt in for children to return in person or stay home? Should we approve hybrid models? Would we let our children come to school wearing masks? By considering these questions with the important Jewish value of pikuach nefesh, saving a life, I thought, what would be the safest choice? What would work best? Understanding that our answers may not be the same, we each considered alternatives, weighed options, and wrapped our heads around the ever-changing new normal. Marking our life cycles and holidays in meaningful ways was important too. The first major holiday after we shut down was Passover. How would we celebrate this year? Studies have shown that Passover is one of the most widely observed holidays of any other in our calendar. And before we knew it, the time was upon us. We couldn't reschedule it, but we certainly couldn't celebrate it with hundreds of you gathering for a second night Seder in Wolf Tumim Hall. So the clergy shared familiar words of the Haggadah from this very spot on our bima. We told the story and recalled the importance of feeling as though we were each personally redeemed from Egypt. And in a way, we had been. One highlight of Passover in the pandemic was a nationally live-streamed Seder on the 4th night. Jewish celebrities and musicians from across the globe led an online Passover Seder. In what was both meaningful and lighthearted, thousands of Jews chose to opt in by tuning in. It struck me as our family watched what a marvelous 21st century moment this was, one that previous generations could never have imagined. And had it not been for the pandemic, I would have missed seeing Idina Menzel holding up sheet music and singing the 4 questions, or listening to Emmy Award winner Daniel Levy share his thoughts on Passover. It was a merging of pop culture and tradition that demonstrated how relevant, endlessly fascinating, and alive Judaism can be. We didn't give up on Passover. We reimagined it. We chose to observe it in a completely new way, and we connected online with Jews around the world. While there is no replacement for a true panim el panim, a face-to-face encounter, this online Seder allowed us to bring our digital table to our Seder table. In Exodus chapter 19, we are taught, "Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured people, Am Segulah, among all the peoples." This was a contractual agreement, a covenant. We must live up to our part by observing and honoring the mitzvot. And in exchange, God will uphold God's part of the deal. Despite challenges, pandemics, and difficulties, we are not exempt from choosing to opt in. As Rabbi David Wolpe notes, chosenness is not a privilege to boast of, but a task to be undertaken. It is to keep constantly in mind the words of the prophet Micah, to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Most importantly, we can't give up even when we feel as though the road is too difficult or too challenging. On Yom Kippur, we are introspective and probe deeply into our own souls. We yearn for the normalcy we often took for granted. We pray for the health and well-being of our community. We seek a sense of shalom, true wholeness and fullness in every dimension of our lives. The days now seem to blend together, but we are still called to act and choose our response to the questions that drive us. As a people who has chosen to opt in, we must hold ourselves to a higher standard. This time especially calls upon us to fine-tune our personal moral compasses. This may be the first pandemic of our lifetimes, which is scary, and we are grateful to be experiencing a new year. These two ideas are hard to balance. A recent article published on the online platform Medium discussed the many emotions that are in tension for us. It detailed something known as surge capacity, the ability to survive an acutely stressful situation, both physically and mentally. In short-term disasters or traumatic events, our basic fight or flight instinct is triggered. We power through the days or even weeks, and finally, we find solid ground. But this pandemic is entirely different, and it's not over. Many of us have already reached our limits and said enough. As the days have turned into months, there are those in our community who struggle with just getting out of bed in the morning. But we must continue to power through and choose to opt in. It's about being able to make the choice, which has an impact. Some moments have been incredible, and we found a way to smile and laugh. As Rabbi Lyon discussed on Rosh Hashanah, we've discovered these silver linings. And yet, other moments loom so large, they have left us feeling completely spent and emotionally exhausted. But choosing to opt in takes on a whole new meaning now. On this, the holiest day of our year, I wish I had the answer on when this will end, but I don't. Instead, I believe that each and every day is a gift to allow us to opt in to all that Judaism has to offer. We must choose to live according to the values of our tradition. We must choose to live with integrity, and we must choose to live with humility. In this season of forgiveness and hope, may we find what we desire. May we return to Judaism as it fortifies us with all that we need, with comfort, with strength, and with the assurance that our lives hold greater meaning, we can begin our new year filled with hope of what is to come. When we choose to opt in, we will discover just how relevant, endlessly fascinating, and alive Judaism can be. May 5781 be the year that allows our choices to have a greater impact on our lives and all those we love. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, as together we say, Amen.
Amen.